There is a kind of silence that follows betrayal, not the comforting silence of peace, but the deafening quiet of abandonment, the kind that hums like a storm before the winds strike. If you've ever stood in the aftermath of someone else's cruelty, with your heart still bleeding and their footsteps fading in the distance, then you understand this silence. You know what it is to be left holding the broken pieces of what once felt like a safe place. They hurt you, and then, with unflinching ease, they moved on, as if your love was a mistake, as if your loyalty was a burden, as if your very soul was dispensable. What kind of heart wounds and walks away without turning back? What kind of person crafts pain like a sculptor molds clay, carefully, intentionally, without remorse? And why does the world allow them to smile, while you carry the weight of what they did? You weren't just hurt, you were discarded, used in the name of convenience, silenced in the name of pride. They took from you not just time or trust, but parts of your spirit you can't even name. And still, they go on living as if justice doesn't exist, laughing as if they've escaped consequence. But let me assure you, no soul who sows cruelty can outrun the harvest of divine retribution. God is not blind to injustice. He does not slumber while the wicked rejoice. There is a higher courtroom than any on earth, and its judge neither delays nor forgets. What they did in secret, what they did without apology, what they did and walked away from, he saw it all. He noted every tear you held back, every word you swallowed, every scream that echoed only in your chest. You see, karma isn't always loud. Sometimes it walks softly, dressed in ordinary days. It shows up in places they never expected, through failures they can't explain, through emptiness they can't fill, through relationships that mirror the way they treated you. And while you heal, quietly and painfully, they will begin to feel the weight of what they gave you. But here's the question: can you wait on divine timing? Can you trust that your tears are not wasted, that your silence is not weakness, that your brokenness is not the end of the story? Because here is the truth: God does not need your vengeance to be complete. He needs your faith. He doesn't need you to prove anything to the world. He needs you to let go, so he can begin the work of justice. The scales are never unbalanced for long. What is sown in deceit will reap destruction. What is planted in pain will return in fire. They may have forgotten you, but heaven hasn't, and what they left behind, a wounded, confused version of you, God is transforming into someone stronger, wiser, more radiant. They moved on, thinking they got away, but life, guided by the hand of justice, has a memory. Now, let us reflect on the signs that karma is not just an idea, but a promise, that what they thought they escaped is already making its way back to their door. They discarded you like you were nothing, but God treasured what they threw away. There's a kind of pain that only comes from being discarded by someone you loved with your entire soul. And what makes it worse isn't just the leaving. It's how easily they walked away, how lightly they treated the weight of your devotion, as if you were just a moment in their timeline, as if you were just a placeholder until something more exciting, more useful, or more convenient came along. That kind of betrayal doesn't just bruise, it breaks. It leaves you wondering if you ever meant anything at all. But hear this: God never discards what man throws away. What others see as disposable, God sees as divine. While they treated you like you were forgettable, heaven was watching. When they mocked your love, God recorded your sincerity. When they shrugged off your tears like they meant nothing, God saw every single one fall. They didn't just leave you, they exposed their blindness to something priceless. Do you not know how sacred your heart is? Do you not realize the treasure they rejected? You were not weak for loving. You were not foolish for hoping. The fact that you gave everything, while they gave so little, does not make you broken. It makes you rare. It makes you holy. It makes you someone God defends. They discarded you because they couldn't recognize worth. Some people have been in the presence of diamonds so long they become numb to the shine. But time has a way of opening blind eyes, and when that time comes, they will look back and realize what they lost. Not a person to use, not a voice to silence, but a soul that would have stood with them through every storm. A soul whose love had depth, truth, and loyalty they'll never find again. You may be sitting in the ruins, wondering why you were never enough. But what if you weren't meant to be enough for them? What if your spirit was simply too big to be understood by someone so small-hearted? What if God allowed their departure not because you were worthless, but because He couldn't allow them to keep touching something He values so deeply? Yes, they threw you away, but you are not trash. You are not leftovers. You are not forgotten. You are God's craftsmanship, seen, known, and protected. And sometimes God lets people walk out because He's about to crown you with something they could never carry. Don't mourn what walked away. Trust what is walking toward you. What they threw away, God will raise up. What they left behind, God will restore. And one day, when the weight of their own choices comes crashing down, they will remember you. Not with peace, but with regret, because you were never nothing. You were always more than enough. And God never lets His treasures stay buried for long. They build their joy on your suffering. Now life will build their suffering on their choices. Some people don't just hurt. They build ladders from your pain and climb them like victories. They feed off your vulnerability. They laugh while you weep. And in the shadows of your brokenness, they rise. Unbothered, unapologetic, even proud of how they manipulated your kindness. It's a special kind of cruelty. And if you've been through it, you know exactly how it feels. It wasn't just that they walked away, it's that they walked away smiling while you collapsed. It's that they found joy in watching you unravel. It's that they lived their best days while you silently suffered through your worst. And somehow they thought there would never be a price for that. But the truth of this life, etched into the laws of time and spirit, is that no joy built on injustice will ever last. There is a weight to wrongdoing, and even if it's not immediate, that weight always returns to its sender. God allows people to rise sometimes, not to reward them, but to give them room to fall. What they did in secret will echo in public. What they took from you will be taken from them. What they celebrated at your expense will become their own sorrow. Life may be quiet now, but it's watching and it's waiting. Because when you harm someone who was pure to you, you don't just create a wound, you sign a sentence. You write your own karma. They thought your tears were their triumph. But what happens when the very joy they stole begins to rot in their hands? What happens when the friendships they betrayed you for become the same ones that betray them? What happens when their laughter becomes hollow and the peace they tried to fake turns into torment they can't escape? They thought they were winning, but they were borrowing, and every borrowed blessing gained through harm must one day be repaid in full. God is not mocked. Your pain did not go unnoticed. Every night you cried, heaven took note. Every time you smiled through agony, heaven admired your strength. Every time you forgave when you didn't have to, God recorded your mercy. And now, because of all that, they must face what they built. You may not get to see it happen. You may never hear them apologize. But know this, deep in your bones, the universe does not allow cruelty to stand unshaken. Sooner or later, it comes down, and when it does, it comes down hard. That is not revenge, that is restoration. That is divine justice at work. He built joy on your suffering, but joy rooted in pain is cursed from the beginning. It cannot flourish, it cannot endure. What they did to you will be the very thing life uses to unravel them. Not because you wished it, but because it's written into the very nature of justice. What you plant, you reap. What you take, you lose. What you break, breaks you back. So don't waste your days hoping they fall. Spend your days healing, growing, becoming. Because while life prepares their lesson, God is preparing your reward. They thought your silence was weakness, but it was God preparing a storm. There's a certain kind of pain that doesn't scream. It doesn't shout, it doesn't lash out. It goes quiet. It grows still. Not because it doesn't hurt, but because it hurts too much to even form words. And in that silence they assumed you were broken. They mistook your silence as surrender. They thought you were weak, that you had nothing more to say, nothing more to give, and no strength left to fight. But what they never understood was this. Your silence wasn't weakness. It was sacred. It was the moment before transformation. It was the stillness before God moved on your behalf. You didn't answer back because you knew your truth. You didn't fight back because you trusted that justice didn't need noise to be real. And in that quiet, something powerful was building. Something divine. The ones who wronged you believed they had won. They thought their lies buried your voice. They thought your lack of retaliation meant you had no strength left in you. But they were wrong. Dead wrong. Because silence is where God does his greatest work. It's where he builds storms strong enough to shake foundations. It's where he gathers the winds of justice, the thunder of truth and the rain of reckoning. You weren't silent because you were defeated. You were silent because you were chosen. And the chosen don't need to prove themselves to those who are blind to their worth. You were silent because your soul was under divine reconstruction. And while they laughed, while they celebrated your downfall, God was laying the groundwork for their wake-up call. There is a storm coming for those who mock the meek. There is a reckoning coming for those who prey on the quiet-hearted. Because what they don't realize is that every silent tear you shed planted a seed of power. Every prayer you whispered when no one was listening sent a signal to heaven. And now, that silence is about to speak louder than anything they've ever heard. They thought your silence meant you were small, but you were simply surrendering the battle to a greater hand. The same hand that parted seas, calmed winds, and tore down walls without a single shout. The same hand that sees the unseen, hears the unspoken, and remembers the cries of those the world forgets. That hand has been working behind the veil, and soon what was hidden will be revealed. You don't need revenge. You never did, because God does not overlook the silence of the wounded. He lifts it like incense to his throne, and he answers not with whispers, but with justice. He will take the silence they ridiculed and turn it into a roar they can't escape. They thought you were done, but your silence was only the beginning. They thought moving on was escape, but God always knows the address of the guilty. There's something deeply haunting about being wronged by someone who walks away as if nothing happened, as if the damage never mattered, as if your pain was a footnote in their story. They move on, smiling, laughing, living freely while you're left gathering the shattered pieces of everything they broke. And maybe they thought that by walking away, they escaped the consequences. Maybe they believed that life would forget, that time would wash it all away. But what they forgot, what they never understood, is that God does not lose track of souls. He doesn't misplace justice. He doesn't get distracted and move on like people do. God knows the address of the guilty. They can run into new friendships, bury themselves in new relationships, or post photos pretending they are at peace. But you cannot hide from the one who created light and sees in the dark. You cannot hide from truth. It follows you, it shadows you, and it shows up uninvited just when you think you've buried your past deep enough. They thought they left their wrongdoings behind, but wrong doesn't stay in the past. It lives in the present until it's accounted for. You cannot move forward freely when you've built your future on someone else's ruin. That pain they left you with, it doesn't just disappear. It echoes, and that echo doesn't fade until the one who caused it listens to the sound of what they did. They thought your suffering would stay with you while they moved on untouched. But God has a different story written. One where the guilty are not forgotten, where every unjust action is answered, and where running only leads you straight into the lesson you tried to avoid. You didn't need to chase them. You didn't need to demand justice, because justice has legs of its own. And it walks slowly, deliberately, right to the doorstep of those who thought they escaped. There is no expiration date on truth, no time limit on what God remembers. And when He decides to move, the timing is always perfect. They thought they escaped your hurt, but they didn't escape the one who holds your tears. And maybe the hardest part for you is knowing they're out there, pretending they're at peace, while you're still bleeding. Maybe it feels like their life is blossoming while yours is still in pieces. But don't let the illusion confuse you. Because peace that's built on betrayal is always temporary. Joy that's rooted in injustice is always cursed. And the life they thought they built away from you, that very life will eventually lead them back to the place where they must face what they did. God knows how to find people, not with cruelty but with conviction, not with violence, but with the mirror of consequence. And when He knocks, it's never a question of if, only when. They may have moved on, but they never moved out of God's reach. They mocked your pain, now they'll be haunted by their own laughter. There is a cruelty that goes beyond the wound. It's when your pain becomes their entertainment, when your breaking heart becomes their joke, when the trembling in your voice, the tears you tried to hide, the sorrow that suffocated you, becomes something they mock behind closed doors or even in public without shame. That kind of cruelty doesn't just hurt, it shatters something sacred inside you. It makes you question your own worth. It makes you ask, was my pain really that meaningless to them? You gave them truth. You gave them love. You gave them every part of your heart, raw and unfiltered. And when life broke you, when the world pushed you to your knees instead of offering a hand, they laughed. Not just laughed, they rejoiced, as if your destruction gave them power, as if your wounds were their trophies. But what they didn't know is this: pain is never mocked without consequence. When someone laughs at a soul that's breaking, that laughter becomes a curse. Because mocking pain isn't just a reflection of a cruel heart. It's a declaration of spiritual blindness. They didn't just mock your pain. They mocked what God was using to grow you. And heaven never stays silent in the face of that kind of injustice. You see, God doesn't just comfort the broken-hearted. He defends them. He doesn't just heal the wounded. He remembers who caused the wound. And when your cries went unheard by them, they were heard by the one who never turns his face away from suffering. Every time they mocked you, heaven listened. Every giggle behind your back, every whispered joke, every sarcastic remark, when you needed understanding, they were noted not by a vindictive hand, but by a holy one. And now they'll be haunted, not by you, not by anything you say or do, but by echoes, echoes of their own laughter, echoes of the moments they thought were harmless, echoes of the nights they smirked while you wept. Life has a way of turning mirrors toward the ones who break others, and when their moment of pain comes, and it will, they will remember. That's not revenge, that's memory. That's the soul trying to reconcile with the damage it once ignored. They thought your pain was a punchline, they thought your silence was permission, but God was never laughing. And God never forgets who laughed while you bled. And maybe, just maybe, that's why they can't find peace now, why sleep won't come easy, why they have everything on the outside, but still feel so empty inside. Because somewhere deep in their spirit, they know what they did, and no amount of pretending can silence the guilt that creeps in when the world goes quiet. Their laughter will return to them, not through your bitterness, but through life's balance. You don't need to see it happen. You don't need to wish for their sorrow. But you can rest in the truth that no mockery of real pain ever fades away without consequence. It lingers, it circles, and eventually it speaks. So if you're still holding the sting of that mockery, release it. Not because it wasn't real, but because it's already being answered. Your tears were not wasted. Your dignity was never lost. And your pain was never funny. Not to God, not to the universe, and not to the parts of you that still believe in justice. You may feel like the world didn't defend you, but heaven did. And what they once laughed at, they'll soon wish they had handled with reverence. They gave you scars, but God will make them feel the weight of each one. Scars are not just reminders of what happened. They are echoes of what was felt. They are proof that something once cut you so deeply it changed the shape of your soul. And the cruelest truth is this: they gave you those scars and walked away as if nothing happened. As if you were supposed to carry that pain in silence, stitch your own wounds in the dark, and pretend that you were never bleeding. But you did bleed. You bled emotionally, spiritually, and mentally, in places no one could see. They left fingerprints on your trauma. They may not have raised a hand, but their words, sharp, cold, calculated, became daggers. Their silence, in moments you needed them the most, that silence screamed. Their indifference pierced deeper than hate. They gave you scars not by accident, but by choice. And now, you carry the weight of that damage every day. They hurt you in ways they never had to apologize for. And maybe the worst part is that they continued on with their life, while you stood frozen in the aftermath. They moved on to new people, new places, new dreams, while your spirit was still learning how to stand again. But here is what they don't realize. God was with you when the wound was fresh, and He is still with you now that the scar remains. The world may forget what they did, You may even be told to forgive and just move on. But God does not minimize what harmed his child. He does not ignore emotional violence. He does not forget the hands, visible or invisible, that marked your soul. You see, there's a weight to every scar, a spiritual weight. And though you've been carrying that burden silently, God has measured every ounce of it. Every sleepless night, every anxious breath, every piece of your confidence they chipped away. He's counted them all. And he does not let weight go unpaid. The same hands that scarred you will one day feel the weight of those very wounds, not through your revenge, but through the quiet and relentless justice of life itself. Because pain never disappears, it transforms. What they thought they buried becomes a harvest. What they thought was forgotten becomes a mirror. One day, when they least expect it, they will feel the weight of what they did, not through suffering alone, but through the absence of peace. They won't understand why joy escapes them, why every relationship feels hollow, why they can't outrun their own reflection. And that's when it will begin, the slow, soul-deep realization that they didn't just hurt someone, they scarred someone who genuinely cared, someone who gave, loved, trusted and hoped, someone they never had the right to damage. You may think they got away with it, that life rewarded them while punishing you, but you have no idea what God has been building out of your scars. While they move in ignorance, you are moving in transformation. And the day is coming when your healing will shine so bright, it will blind those who once tried to dim you. They gave you scars, but they didn't realize that those scars would speak. They didn't know they would become testimonies. They didn't imagine that the same pain meant to destroy you would become your crown. And they never dreamed that God would return to them the weight of what they made you carry. They thought your silence meant their damage was successful. But God has a way of turning the silent into storms, the wounded into warriors, and the scarred into symbols of his justice. What they gave you didn't break you, but it will break them when the weight of it finally returns home. They wounded a heart that was pure, and that purity will be their condemnation. Some people don't realize the sacredness of the soul they're mistreating until it's too late. They see kindness and think weakness. They see patience and mistake it for desperation. They see love that forgives too quickly, holds on too long, and stays even when broken, and they take advantage of it, believing it will always be there. But when they wound a heart that is pure, they aren't just breaking trust. They're tampering with something heaven holds dear. And what they don't understand is this. It is that very purity they ignored, abused, and mistreated that will now become their greatest condemnation. You didn't love halfway. You didn't hold back. You gave yourself to them, not with caution, but with faith, with the belief that your sincerity would be seen, that your loyalty would be valued, that your soul would be safe in their hands. You opened your heart without disguise, without manipulation, without hidden motives. You were real, and for people who wear masks, realness is threatening. For people who hide behind walls, your transparency was too exposing. So instead of honoring you, they hurt you. Instead of cherishing you, they tried to break you. And maybe they succeeded. Maybe they shattered parts of you that you're still trying to gather. Maybe they left you questioning your own goodness, your own decisions, your own sense of worth, because when a pure heart gets betrayed, it doesn't just hurt. It loses something it never wanted to lose. Innocence, trust, belief in others. The world becomes darker not because of what happened, but because of who it happened with. But let me say this directly to your soul. Your purity was never the problem. Your light wasn't the issue. Your open-hearted love wasn't wrong. What went wrong was how they handled it. They mishandled something holy. They touched what was sacred with unclean hands. And heaven does not look away when the pure in heart are wounded. God says, "Blessed are the pure in heart, for they shall see God." That purity, that softness, that sincerity, they are not liabilities. They are marks of divine favor. And when someone chooses to harm that, to use it, to manipulate it for their own gain, they don't just hurt you. They offend the one who made you that way. You see, your purity wasn't weakness. It was a gift. A rare spiritual treasure in a world that trades truth for convenience. And because they couldn't recognize it, they treated it like it was ordinary. But purity never stays buried. And the day will come when they will long for the very love they once walked away from. They'll look for it in others, but they won't find it. They'll crave the peace they felt in your presence, but it won't come back, because purity like yours doesn't return to those who destroyed it. It moves on, it heals, it glows somewhere else, and for the rest of their life they'll be haunted by the contrast, the memory of how they were loved purely and how they responded with betrayal. That's where the real punishment begins, not in fire or thunder, but in the quiet suffering of regret, in the moments when they realized they were given something eternal and traded it for something temporary, when they understand, too late, that they had access to something sacred and they treated it like it was replaceable. They will remember the way you smiled through your sadness, the way you stood by them even when they gave you every reason to walk away. They'll remember how you prayed for them when you should have hated them, how you covered their mistakes with grace, how you gave them space to grow, how you believed in them when they gave you none of that in return. And when they remember, their soul will not rest. Because once someone experiences the touch of a pure heart, nothing else satisfies. Nothing else feels as real, and the absence of that love becomes louder than its presence ever was. That's the justice of God. It doesn't always come with thunder. Sometimes it comes through emptiness, through longing, through the unbearable weight of what if and what was. You didn't lose because you loved with a pure heart. You were chosen because of it. And they will carry the memory of what they destroyed, not because you cursed them, but because God allows the memory of purity to become a mirror, one that never stops reflecting what they did and what they'll never be able to replace. So if you're still wondering why it hurts so deeply, it's because your heart was never meant for destruction. It was meant to be protected, and though they failed to do so, God never will. Your purity will rise again. And their betrayal? That will be the weight they carry forever. Not because you demand it, but because that's how life honors a soul like yours. There's something sacred about surviving what was meant to destroy you. It isn't loud, it isn't dramatic, it's quiet, gentle. Like the first breath after a long cry, like the slow but certain rising of the sun after a night so dark you thought morning would never come. That's where you are now, on the other side of the storm, not because it didn't try to drown you, but because God walked you through it. They hurt you and moved on, but that doesn't mean they've escaped. They didn't leave with peace. They left with debt, a debt not owed to you, but to the truth itself, because you cannot harm someone's spirit and walk away unchanged. You cannot leave someone in emotional ruins and expect your own soul to remain untouched. That's not how this life works. That's not how God works. You see, your scars tell a story of pain, yes, but also a story of protection, of how you were held even when you were hurting, of how you were chosen even when you felt discarded. And while they were mocking, ignoring, or moving on, something eternal was happening in your silence. Something unshakable was being built within you. Strength, wisdom, discernment, faith, things that can't be faked or fabricated, only forged through fire. You were never weak for breaking. In fact, the fact that you broke and still rose is the proof that God was with you all along, that the darkness didn't win, that the betrayal didn't finish the story. They thought leaving would erase the damage. They thought walking away without accountability would shield them from consequence. But no door is thick enough to keep out the hand of divine justice, and no distance is far enough to outrun a harvest that was planted in cruelty. The beautiful truth is that your healing is not only your freedom, it's their judgment. Because healing means you didn't become like them. Healing means their hate didn't shape you. Healing means they failed to ruin what they tried to break. And the moment your heart begins to beat again with peace, with clarity, with love that is wiser and stronger, that's the moment life begins to repay you, not through their downfall, but through your restoration. Let them wonder. Let them feel the silence of the bond they destroyed. Let them carry the weight of what they never apologized for. That's not your battle anymore. Your battle now is to become the version of yourself that their betrayal was never worthy of, to rise into the destiny they could never hold, because God is not just a healer. He is a rewarder, and every tear you cried in private has prepared you for blessings too big to explain. You don't need to chase answers. You don't need to seek revenge, because karma walks quietly, but it never loses direction. And God's justice may be patient, but it is perfect. They will remember you, not because of your pain, but because of their part in it. And that memory will echo louder than any words you could ever speak. So breathe deep now. You've made it through what you thought would break you, and that makes you powerful beyond words. Let the past stay where it is, but never forget the strength it gave you. Never forget that the ones who hurt you didn't define you. They exposed who they were and revealed who you are. And who you are is someone God refuses to leave unvindicated, someone heaven calls precious, someone whose scars are no longer signs of destruction, but of divine protection. They hurt you and moved on, but God stayed. And now He's writing the part of your story where you win, not by fighting, not by shouting, but by healing, and by being seen, fully, finally, forever, by the only eyes that ever mattered.